My friends, please subscribe to my channel, like the video and write a comment, and we begin. Part 1. The Empty Seats. My wedding day. I dreamt about it since I was a little girl, flipping through bridal magazines and sketching my ideal dress in the margins of my notebooks. I'd always envisioned a small, intimate affair. No sprawling castle, no hundreds of guests I barely knew. Just a heartfelt celebration of love with the people who truly mattered to me, the ones who had been there through thick and thin. I found that in Mark. He wasn't flashy or extravagant, but he was kind, funny, and fiercely loyal. He saw me, really saw me, in a way that no one else ever had. And on this day, our wedding day, I wanted to share that love, that connection, with everyone we held dear. We'd chosen a beautiful outdoor venue nestled in the rolling hills outside of town, a sprawling meadow dotted with wildflowers, framed by towering oak trees. I pictured exchanging vows under a delicate canopy of twinkling fairy lights, the soft, ethereal glow illuminating the joyous smiles of our friends and family. We had spent months meticulously planning every detail, poring over Pinterest boards, agonizing over the perfect shade of blush for the roses, the playlist that captured our relationship, the locally sourced menu that reflected our values. I wanted everything to be perfect, not for show, but because this was our moment, a reflection of our love story. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, the kind of day that felt blessed by the heavens. I woke up feeling a mix of excitement and nerves, a fluttering in my stomach that refused to be quelled. My bridesmaids arrived, buzzing with energy, and the getting ready process began. Hair, makeup, champagne toasts, and endless chatter filled the air, a welcome distraction from the anxieties swirling within me. As I slipped into my dress, a simple, elegant gown of ivory lace, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. This was it. This was the day I would officially become Mrs. Sarah Miller. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time that day, I saw a bride looking back. Confident, beautiful, happy. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 3 p.m. As I stood backstage, waiting for my cue to walk down the aisle, I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, trying to savor the moment. I could hear the soft murmur of the guests as they found their seats, the gentle strumming of the acoustic guitar, the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Then the music started. A soft, melodic tune that Mark and I had chosen together. It was my cue. With a smile on my face, I began to walk, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the end of the aisle and saw Mark standing at the altar, his eyes filled with love and admiration, I felt a surge of joy so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. But then my gaze drifted to the front row, and the smile froze on my face. 2 seats, right next to each other, remained conspicuously empty. My parents' seats. A wave of icy dread washed over me, stealing the joy from the moment. I tried to tell myself there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. Maybe their flight had been delayed. Maybe they'd gotten lost on the way to the venue. Maybe something had come up at the last minute. I desperately clung to these possibilities, refusing to let the panic take hold. But deep down, a cold, hard knot of dread was forming in my stomach. I knew my parents. They were always punctual, always organized, always meticulously planned. And they knew how much this day meant to me. I'd been explicit about how much their support and presence meant to me. The ceremony went by in a blur. I recited my vows, my voice wavering slightly. I exchanged rings with Mark, my fingers trembling. I tried to focus on the joy of the moment, to block out the nagging feeling of unease. But the absence of my parents hung over me like a dark cloud, casting a long, ominous shadow over what should have been the happiest day of my life. Every word, every song, every moment was tainted by their missing presence. After the ceremony, as the guests mingled and congratulated us, offering their well wishes and compliments, I felt like I was going through the motions, a robot programmed to smile and nod and say thank you. But inside, I was screaming. I excused myself from the crowd, feigning a sudden need to freshen up, and rushed to a quiet corner. I pulled out my phone and dialed my parents' cell phones, one after the other. Each call went straight to voicemail. Mom? Dad? It's me, Sarah. Where are you? What's going on? The ceremony's over. Everyone's here. Please call me back. I'm so worried. My voice cracked with emotion. Hours passed and still no word. The reception started, and I forced myself to smile, to dance with Mark, to make small talk with the guests. But inside, I was crumbling, piece by piece. My parents were supposed to be here, celebrating with me, sharing in my happiness. They were supposed to walk me down the aisle, give a heartfelt toast, and dance with me to our special song. But they were nowhere to be found. Their empty seats a constant, painful reminder of their absence. I spent most of the night looking anxiously at the entrance, hoping they would just come and I could just have my day. But as the hours flew by and the dance floor began to clear out, I knew it was a useless venture. As the reception drew to a close, I stood there, a bride on her wedding day, surrounded by well-wishers, but feeling utterly alone. The fairy lights flickered and dimmed, casting long shadows across the meadow. And I knew, with a sinking heart, that something was terribly, terribly wrong. Part 2: The phone call. The honeymoon suite felt more like a prison cell. I couldn't shake the image of those empty seats, replaying the ceremony over and over in my head, each time amplifying the pain. Mark tried his best to comfort me, holding me close, whispering soothing words, but I was inconsolable. The joy of our wedding day had been irrevocably tainted, replaced by a gnawing anxiety and a deep sense of betrayal. Sleep was elusive. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my parents' faces, their expressions blank, unreadable. I imagined every possible scenario, from a tragic accident to a sudden illness, each one more horrifying than the last. I kept checking my phone, willing it to ring, desperate for some kind of explanation. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, mirroring my mood. The beautiful ocean view from our balcony offered no solace. I felt drained, empty, like a shell of my former self. Mark brought me coffee and breakfast in bed, but I could barely eat a bite. The knot in my stomach had tightened, making it impossible to swallow. Finally, around noon, after what felt like an eternity, my phone rang. I lunged for it, my heart leaping into my throat. The caller ID displayed Mom's cell. I hesitated for a moment, bracing myself for the worst, then answered the call, my voice trembling. Mom? Where are you? What happened? Are you okay? I blurted out, the words tumbling over each other in my desperate attempt to get some answers. There was a long pause, a pregnant silence that stretched on for what felt like an eternity. And then, the sound that I least expected, the sound that shattered the last vestiges of hope. My mother started to laugh. It wasn't a warm, loving laugh, the kind that I associated with happy memories. It was a cold, brittle laugh, a harsh, mocking sound that sent shivers down my spine. It was the kind of laugh you hear in movies from villainous characters when they reveal that they have betrayed you. "Oh, Sarah, darling," she said, her voice dripping with amusement, laced with a tone that was almost cruel. "You really thought we'd be there? After everything we've told you?" I was stunned, paralyzed by disbelief. "What? What do you mean? What are you talking about?" I stammered, struggling to make sense of her words. The floor suddenly seemed to move beneath my feet. "Well, dear, your father and I decided we had much better things to do with our time. After all, weddings are boring, and yours was sure to be the most dull of them all." She chuckled, a sound that echoed in my ears like a death knell. "We took a trip to the Bahamas. We needed a break from all the wedding planning stress. It was much more relaxing than spending the day watching you marry him." She spat out him like it was a curse. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You missed my wedding for a vacation? For a vacation? Are you serious?" My voice rose in pitch, cracking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Oh, lighten up, Sarah," she said, her tone dismissive, as if I was overreacting to a minor inconvenience. "It's not like you're royalty or anything. It's not as if the wedding was broadcast across the world. Besides," she continued, her voice taking on a sharper edge, "we told you we didn't approve of Mark. We told you he wasn't good enough for you. But you never listen to us, do you? You always have to do things your own way. So, we decided to avoid the whole thing altogether. It was much easier that way." The words hit me like a slap in the face. My parents, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, had deliberately missed my wedding. Not because of an emergency, not because of unforeseen circumstances, but because they disapproved of my choice of husband and found a tropical vacation more appealing. My anger started to boil, a searing white-hot rage that threatened to consume me. How could you do this to me? How could you be so cruel? This was the most important day of my life. You were supposed to be there for me. You were supposed to support me. My voice was shaking with fury, tears streaming down my face. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You always were prone to histrionics, just like your mother. You'll get over it. Besides," she added, her tone softening slightly, but only to deliver an even more devastating blow. "We left you a check. It's in the mail. Consider it a wedding gift. A small token to make up for our absence." She paused, then added with a chilling finality, "Try not to spend it all in one place, dear. You'll need it when that marriage of yours inevitably falls apart." And with that, she hung up, leaving me reeling, gasping for air, the phone slipping from my numb fingers. I was left standing in the middle of the room, alone with my broken heart, the sound of my mother's laughter echoing in my ears, a constant reminder of their callous disregard for my happiness. My parents had destroyed me, and they didn't even care. Part 3. The Inheritance. The check arrived 2 days later, a crisp, impersonal piece of paper tucked inside a generic Hallmark card. It was for $10,000, a sum that would have once seemed significant, but now felt like a paltry consolation prize, a feeble attempt to buy my silence. I stared at it, my hands trembling, a bitter taste rising in my throat. It was a band-aid on a gaping wound, a hollow gesture that did nothing to mend the broken bonds between me and my parents. I tore the check into tiny pieces, the act a small, defiant act of rebellion against their control. The money meant nothing. I would rather have their love and support, their presence at my wedding, than all the riches in the world. A week later, a thick, legal-sized envelope arrived in the mail, postmarked from my parents' lawyer. It was formal and intimidating, the kind of document that spelled trouble. Inside was a letter from the lawyer, informing me of the passing of my parents' will, along with a certified copy of the document itself. I braced myself, a familiar wave of anxiety washing over me. I expected more disappointment, more rejection, perhaps a passive-aggressive note disguised as legal jargon. But what I found was even more shocking, more devastating than anything I could have imagined. I sat down at the kitchen table, took a deep breath, and began to read the will, my heart pounding in my chest. The language was dense and convoluted, filled with legal terminology that made my head spin. But the gist of it was clear. Upon their death, my parents' entire estate, a substantial fortune amassed over decades of hard work and shrewd investments, including real estate, stocks, and other assets, would be divided equally between my brother, David, and a local animal shelter. There was a brief mention of me, a single sentence that sent a shiver of cold dread down my spine. Due to circumstances as described in the addendum, Sarah Miller will not receive any portion of the estate. An addendum. A separate document detailing the reasons for my disinheritance. My fingers trembled as I turned to the next page. There it was, in stark black and white prose, the justification for my exclusion from their wealth, a scathing indictment of my character and my choices. The will stipulated that I had demonstrated a consistent pattern of poor judgment and irresponsible behavior throughout her adult life, including but not limited to her ill-advised decision to marry Mark Miller against the express wishes and guidance of her parents. It further stated that I had repeatedly exhibited a lack of respect for their values and traditions, and that she had proven herself to be fundamentally incapable of managing her own affairs, let alone a significant inheritance. The will concluded with the devastating pronouncement that my parents believed I was unfit to manage their wealth, and that granting me any portion of their estate would be contrary to their wishes and would ultimately be detrimental to her well-being. I was completely cut out, disinherited, erased from their legacy. I reread the will, my mind reeling, searching for any loophole, any mistake, any sign that this was all some kind of cruel joke. But it was clear as day, written in precise, unambiguous language. My parents had intentionally disinherited me, not on a whim, but after careful consideration and meticulous planning. The implication was clear. They blamed me for everything. for marrying Mark, for defying their expectations, for choosing my own path in life. They saw my independence as a betrayal, my happiness as a personal affront, and they were punishing me for it, even from beyond the grave, solidifying their rejection in the most permanent, most irrevocable way possible. I felt numb, hollowed out, as if all the blood had drained from my body. First, they missed my wedding, shattering my dreams of a perfect day. Then, they laughed about it, dismissing my pain with callous indifference. Now, they were disinheriting me, cementing their disapproval in legal stone, casting me out of their family and leaving me with nothing. I felt isolated, adrift in a sea of despair, completely alone in the world. My parents, the people who were supposed to love me and support me unconditionally, had turned against me, their rejection complete and absolute. I had lost my family, my inheritance, and my sense of belonging, all in one fell swoop. The sense of injustice washed over me. This was not the last they would hear from me. Part 4. The Secret. I couldn't bear the silence, the crushing weight of unanswered questions and raw, unadulterated grief. I needed answers, even if they were painful. I needed to understand why my parents, who had always seemed to prioritize family, had turned against me so completely. I knew David, my brother, was the only person who might have some insight into what had happened, some explanation for my parents' behavior. I called him, my voice tight with a mixture of anger, hurt, and desperate curiosity, demanding a meeting. He sounded hesitant but agreed to meet me for lunch the following day. The restaurant we chose was a small, unassuming bistro in a quiet part of town, a place we had frequented as children, and a place where we had so many family memories. As I waited for him, I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. This meeting was crucial. When David finally arrived, he looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting around the room, avoiding my gaze. He had always been a sensitive, quiet soul, and I could see that he was struggling to process everything. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper, etched with worry and a sense of burden. He avoided my stare and fidgeted with his silverware. "Look, Sarah," he began, his voice low and hesitant. "I know this is a mess. I know what happened at the wedding, I know about the will. But I didn't have anything to do with it. I swear." "Really?" I said, my voice sharp with skepticism. "You're telling me you had no idea about any of this? That you were completely blindsided?" I didn't believe him. I found it impossible that a brother and sister did not know of each other's lives. David hesitated, then sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Okay, fine. I knew. But I didn't agree with it. I tried to talk Mom and Dad out of it. I told them it wasn't fair, that it was wrong. But they wouldn't listen. They were set on this." I felt a wave of both relief and anger wash over me. Relief that he was finally being honest. Anger that he hadn't told me sooner. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you warn me? You knew how much I wanted to have my parents there, even if I knew that they didn't like Mark." David looked down at his plate, his cheeks flushing slightly. Because they made me promise not to. They made me swear I wouldn't tell you anything. They said if I did, they'd cut me out too." My breath caught in my throat. They threatened you? They used you to get to me." David nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and guilt. "They were obsessed with control, Sarah. You know that. They always had to have their way. And they hated that you were so independent, that you didn't need them anymore. They always wanted me to be the golden child. I guess I just wanted their approval." The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a disturbing picture of manipulation and control. My parents, consumed by their own insecurities and their need to maintain a tight grip on their children's lives, had orchestrated this entire situation to punish me for daring to defy them. They were punishing both of us. But why? I asked, my voice cracking with emotion. Why did they hate me so much? What did I do to deserve this? I needed to understand their motivations. What had I done so that my parents would cut me off from the will, and what did they have against Mark? David hesitated again, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. He clearly wasn't comfortable revealing what he was about to say. He glanced around the restaurant as if afraid of being overheard, then leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's something you don't know, Sarah," he said, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and guilt. Something they never told you. Something they've kept secret your entire life. He paused, his gaze flicking nervously between me and the other diners. You're not their biological daughter, Sarah. The words hit me like a physical blow, a sudden, violent punch to the gut. The world around me seemed to tilt and spin, the familiar surroundings blurring into a kaleidoscope of colors. The ground seemed to be slipping beneath my feet. My breath hitched in my throat. I gripped the edge of the table for support, my knuckles white. The room started to close in. What? I gasped, my voice barely audible. What are you talking about? That's not possible. David took a deep, shaky breath, steeling himself to deliver the final, shattering blow. Mom and Dad couldn't have children, he said softly, his voice filled with both sadness and a strange sort of relief. They adopted you when you were a baby. They always kept it a secret because they were afraid you'd leave them if you found out. But they never really loved you the way they loved me. I'm their blood. You were just a substitute. Your birth certificate reads Mary, but it was changed at the hospital to Sarah. You were their project, not their child. Part 5. The truth revealed. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, like a shroud. You're not their biological daughter, Sarah. My mind struggled to process the information, to reconcile the years of memories, the complex relationship I had with my parents, with this new earth-shattering revelation. It felt like the foundation of my identity, the very core of my being, had been ripped away, leaving me stranded in a foreign land. I stared at David, my face a mask of shock and disbelief, tears welling in my eyes. What are you talking about? I whispered, my voice barely audible above the thumping of my heart. That's impossible. I look like them. I have their mannerisms. But even as I said the words, I knew they rang hollow. I saw fleeting glints of their faces and could not remember them. David reached across the table, his hand covering mine. His touch was gentle, comforting, but did little to ease the pain that was searing through my soul. I know it's a lot to take in, Sarah, but it's true. They adopted you when you were just a few weeks old. They couldn't have children of their own, and they desperately wanted a family, but they never told you because they were afraid. Afraid you'd find out, afraid you'd leave them, afraid that you would not measure up to their standards, or perhaps you would become superior. He paused, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and guilt. But honestly, Sarah, I think they were also ashamed. Ashamed of the circumstances surrounding your adoption. They never saw you as truly their own, and they couldn't love you completely. But why didn't they ever tell me? I sobbed, the tears streaming down my face now, blurring my vision. Why did they keep it a secret for so long? They were afraid, David said softly. And honestly, Sarah, they were ashamed. Your biological mother, she wasn't exactly someone they wanted you to know about. He hesitated, then reached into his wallet and pulled out a small, worn photograph. He slid it across the table towards me. This is your mother, Sarah, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Her name was Maggie. I picked up the photograph, my hands trembling. It was a black and white picture of a young woman, with striking green eyes and a cascade of fiery red hair. She had a mischievous grin on her face and an air of bohemian freedom about her. She looked familiar somehow, but I couldn't quite place her. Who is she? I asked, my voice choked with emotion. Her name was Maggie. She was a singer, a performer in a jazz club. She was wild, vibrant, untamed. She was free, David said, a wistful look in his eyes. She had a wild spirit, just like you. As I stared at the photograph, a memory surfaced, a long-forgotten fragment of my childhood. A memory of sneaking out of the house one night, drawn by the sounds of music and laughter, and finding myself standing outside a dimly lit bar in a seedy part of town. I remembered seeing a woman on stage, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlight, singing her heart out, her voice raw and powerful. The woman in the photograph. She used to sing at the Blue Moon, right? I whispered, my voice filled with a mixture of recognition and disbelief. David nodded, a sad smile playing on his lips. She did. And Dad used to go there every night. He was obsessed with her. He was infatuated by her. But she didn't want him. She was too free-spirited for him. She was too busy to be with him. When she got pregnant with you, she didn't want to give you up, but she knew she couldn't take care of you on her own. She didn't want you to grow up in that world. So she made a deal with mom and dad. They would raise you, provide you with a stable home and a good education, but they had to promise never to tell you about her. They had to promise to erase her from your life. I stared at the photograph, tears streaming down my face, a strange mixture of grief, anger, and relief washing over me. Grief for the mother I never knew, for the life I had never lived, for the stolen identity that had shaped my entire existence. Anger at my adoptive parents for their deception, their manipulation, their inability to truly love me for who I was. Relief for finally understanding why I had never quite fit in, why I had always felt like an outsider looking in, why I had always sensed a subtle distance, a carefully guarded reserve, in my relationship with my parents. It all made sense now. The constant comparisons to others, the subtle rejections, the unspoken disapproval, the feeling of never quite measuring up to their expectations. I had spent my entire life trying to earn the love and acceptance of people who weren't even my real family, people who were incapable of giving me what I truly needed. Now, the day-to-day memories of their faces began to blur, and I wondered if I had truly loved them, or if they had merely been the mother and father I needed at the time. I had never been their own blood. They had only taken me in. I realized that I could not get through to them and decided to dedicate myself to learning the life of Maggie, my mother, and doing everything I could to become her, rather than be the ghost child they created. I decided to leave them both to their new lives and did not keep contact. As I left the restaurant that day, I felt a sense of liberation, a newfound sense of purpose. The truth was finally out, and while the pain was still raw and the wounds were still deep, I was no longer trapped in a lie. I knew who I was, or at least I knew where I came from. I resolved to find out everything I could about my mother, to learn about her life, her passions, her dreams. I wanted to understand the woman who had given me life, the woman who had entrusted me to strangers, the woman whose wild spirit lived on within me. I also realized that I needed to be strong for Mark and that I could not bring my dark past into our new life. I enrolled in singing lessons, joined a local jazz ensemble, and started to explore my own creative potential. I embraced my independence, my unconventionality, my poor decision-making, as my parents had called it. I learned to trust my instincts, to follow my heart, to live my life on my own terms, without fear of judgment or disapproval. I traveled to all the jazz clubs around town and asked around to see if anyone remembered her, and soon found some of her old friends. The wedding I once envisioned, the perfect family reunion it was supposed to be, faded into a distant memory. In its place was a new vision, a vision of a life filled with authenticity, passion, and self-acceptance. I was no longer defined by my adoptive parents' rejection, by their skewed values, by their suffocating control. I was Maggie's daughter, a free spirit, a survivor. And I was finally ready to embrace my true identity and create a future that was all my own.